All right. Hi, everyone. It's such a great sight to see an almost full house again. Welcome to our first lecture in the Asymmetry Distinguished Lecture Series of Contemporary Chinese and Sinophone Art. A big shout out, of course, to our first speaker, artist and filmmaker Shen Xin, who came down to London all the way from Isle of Skye in Scotland, and of course Winnie Teo, senior lecturer here at the Courtauld, who's been instrumental in co-organizing and co-convening this lecture series with us. This is to kick off of the second cycle. We had a wonderful cycle last year that delved into energies, attachment, and intimacy across science, art, and ecology, and welcomed a range of fantastic artists and curators as well. The lecture series here is part of a wider collaboration that we foster with the Courtauld Institute of Art. We also support a 2-year postdoc fellowship, and our current fellow, Fei Xuan, also present today, is completing her post this summer. And do sort of keep your eyes peeled on our next open call. I do see many familiar faces tonight, as always. Super happy that we have such a loyal audience, but for those who don't know us, my name is Michelle. I'm director at Asymmetry Art Foundation. We are a small, not-for-profit organization based in East London, and we primarily support curators, practitioners, researchers, writers and thinkers who to any extent identify with Chinese and Sinophone heritage. And working with the Courtauld is one mode of us forging collaboration with partner institutions, but we also have, beyond that, a very varied public programming that we host at our space, so please come visit us. This year, our series is titled Critical Habitats, and it investigates ecologically informed artistic practices who engage with a range of conceptual frameworks concerning land injustice, histories of labor and migration, environmental degradation, and cultural displacement. The invited artists will speak on a variety of themes, including the logistical challenges of gaining access to specific sites, collaborating with local governments and communities, and reflect on issues of translation, authenticity, ethnography, and site specificity. There we go. And now I'll hand over to Wenny, who will properly introduce Shen Xin, and please join me in warmly welcoming them. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming this evening. For those of you that don't know me, as Michelle mentioned, I'm Wenny, Senior Lecturer in Modern and Contemporary Asian Art here at the Courtauld. So as Michelle mentioned, the theme of this year's series, Critical Habitats, is a term that the literary theorist Emily Apter used as early as 2002 to describe ecologically engaged aesthetic practices that denaturalize illusions of friction-free globalism by actively exploring the links between territorial habitat and intellectual habitus, between physical space and ideological force field, between economy and ecology. It is a conceptual framework that is ever more vital today in a period marked by continued environmental crises, forced migration and displacement, ongoing violent struggles over land and territory, rooted in histories of colonialism and extractivism. And we are very pleased to have Shen Xin here as our first speaker for this series on that note, as so few other artists have created such a compelling body of work that explores these liminal contact zones where personal, cultural, political, ecological, and ethical issues converge. Shen does so by not only exposing the fault lines of global systems of power and domination, but also draws attention to the transformative potential of creativity, affect, and relational interconnectedness in reshaping the ways we think about place and belonging. Their work gravitates around forms of inhabitance and dwelling, how we live with others in the places we take shelter and refuge in, as well as the migratory journeys of people, animals, objects, memories, words, and systems of belief to and from these sites. And as Michelle mentioned, Shen has taken a rather long, convoluted journey to get to us here today, having come from the Isle of Skye by bus, train, various other methods. I think it took you almost as long as coming from Asia, I think.
Yeah.
Longer. we are very grateful for you coming, Shen Xin. And prior to that, Shen has also had an itinerant personal geography. They were born in Chengdu, China, graduated from the LaSalle College of the Arts in Singapore, and received an MFA from the Slade School of Fine Art here in London. They have since exhibited very widely with solo exhibitions at the Serpentine Galleries, Chisholm Hill Gallery, Senate House, the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis, among many others, and have been included in important group exhibitions like the recent Shanghai Biennial in 2003, Guangzhou Biennial, the New Museum Triennial, and many others. They were awarded the Baltic Artist Award in 2017 and won Artist in Residence at the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam. So Shen's essayistic videos similarly focus on these diverse geographies and localities, which they'll be sharing with us here in this talk. And I'm often reminded of the post-humanist scholar Rosie Brailotti's notion of nomadic subjectivity when I think of Shen's practice, which bears many similarities with this notion of critical habitats. Braidotti reminds us that creativity is itself a nomadic process of becoming that entails the active displacement of dominant formations of identity, memory, and identification, so as to open them up to the raw that lies on the other side of silence. Whether this other side is a raw of cosmic energy or the unspectacular and barely perceptible heartbeat of a squirrel is just a matter of degrees. What is mobilized is one's capacity to feel, sense, process, and sustain the impact with the complex materiality of this outside world. And on that note, Shen will be discussing the practice and process of embedded storytelling in this talk today, and share excerpts of their recent films, which I'm very excited about, including Solar Wheels, the ongoing series Grounds of Coherence, and the Earth Turned Green, among others. So there will be time for questions after their presentation and drinks afterwards, just down the hall. Please welcome me and join me in welcoming Shen Xin.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks for organizing this whole process. It's been very smooth. So in these contexts, I often think about these talks in a way I constructed in a way that I would like to bring you, the audience, into good relation with my practice. Obviously, there is a challenge that comes with that statement, and therefore there is perhaps a necessary need for a story. And I've sort of roughly structured it around these chapters that won't be announced throughout this sharing session. But it will kind of be obvious because of the context. So I will start with a kind of a beginning and how I started to understand complexity, sufferings, through stories of my own journeys, tracing complicity of systems and where pain and suffering might have come from. There's going to be a lack of details in terms of each words, because I would like to go through them relatively quickly, but at the same time give you a picture of how I have arrived where I am today, which I think is important and constructed as a part of the introduction to the story. And most importantly, each of these works mentioned are made with a lot of people whose efforts are immense, and you can find their names, which I don't have the time to mention today, because if I do, I think I would dedicate a whole session just to talk about that, more than 1 to 3 hours, and some of them are here today. Anyhow. So I start with Snow Country and Counting Blessings, which are both relatively earlier works. And in Snow Country, I looked at emotions that were attached to nation state, emotions that were generated by nation state, specifically addressing hatred. So the hatred towards the Japanese that were generated, educated, implemented in children since a young age, sort of reflected in the possibility of feeling compassion in close geographies, and the violation of women's body, thinking about close geographies. Also, the film was made in Sweden and Norway, so there is this sense of a metaphorical journey that resonates with Kawabata's novel, Snow Country. And in Counting Blessing, it is a story about my father and myself, our journey into Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture and Tibet, equipped with a decolonial lens that I was provided with from my education. Again, using what I've learned to rethink kinship and otherness, entangled in this sort of conversation with my father, for example, asking each other if I asked him if he was cold, and he asked me if the equipment was to my liking that I was using. So lots of conversations like that forms the intimacy of the piece, but at the same time looked at his practice as a Chinese ink painter who painted Tibetan subjects. And there is Shoulders of Giants and Comments de Esprit. Both dealt with the consumption and production of knowledge. In Shoulders of Giants, 4 theorists were invited to speak about the power of art to make changes in our world. They are Esther Leslie, Hannah Black, Sarah O'Sullivan, and Mark Fisher. They were each given a character as motion captured, and the symposium was received as animation characters. And on the other end is a work where the animation became a device, a vehicle to think about consciousness exiting our body, language leaving our being, our capacity, which was a piece made when my father was in coma, a monologue written for my mother. And it borrows concepts that are of a comparative nature, who radicalize who in French deconstruction thoughts and Chinese Taoism. These descriptions don't do my feelings justice, but I think it does help in providing a better picture. And then there's Strongholds and Provocation of the Nightingale, which both dealt with the center being the Buddhist institution that is the center, that is not immune or protected. And then there's the narrative of love, the couple who travel to Scotland to Samye Ling, the couple who are entangled in this power dynamic and love relationship in South Korea. So love advocates for this discernment of power. But the discernment is, say, the centerpiece that is conversing with the center that is not immune or protected. So it has been, up until this point, easy to address darkness or shadow, you can say, since it's always there. But it's also an endless loop, co-creating an entropy. There was a lack of methods or technology that could interfere with where these stories were heading towards, in terms of what comes after the loop, what comes after tracing a totalized complicity. So then, and now, more deeply, I realized that this sort of tendency is a downward spiral of energies that might not have been helpful in facilitating the potential of togetherness. the obsession that we all sort of indulge in now and then, and maybe being critical and learning, is this sort of obsession with what is ruptured, what is broken, but at the same time, without something that can hold us together. And that can easily, it has come to my attention that can easily turn to a narrative of control, of gaining power through claiming what is knowable. But this is not the words per se, but the sort of danger and the alert that I sensed in making and in going towards my inquiry. So it is an inquiry into my own truth, this process. What can be sensed by me, by one, hatred, love, desire for knowingness. And up until this point, I wanted to invent something that could slow this journey of inquiry, to stop it becoming a consumption of knowingness, as well as expand it by taking absence as a tool. So using ghost to mitigate the entropy. So I invented the ghost, so to speak. This is a good example to speak about it. In Brine Lake, a new body, the two actors that you see here, they are employees of different companies located in different countries, respectively Russia and and Japan. And they go to this Japanese company to speak about iodine, to negotiate business proposals and opportunities in this iodine factory, where they speak about the recycling, the extraction, the recycling, the distribution, and the adaptation to new energies of iodine. And they both speak in two different languages, so Russian and Japanese, and Korean and Japanese. But they speak towards two ghosts who you don't see or hear, but you can sense their presence because the camera is the standing for the ghost. So you see the actor say something, and the camera moves to give you a sense of someone saying something with the same kind of subtitle style that indicates something is being said, which means that you wouldn't know what had triggered the sort of response the actors are having, why they're going sort of a little bit shy, or a little bit louder, a little bit more assertive. So those changes are indication of something is being said, but you don't know what is being said. However, this research or this work is looking at, in the center of it, looking at how statelessness in East Asia, mostly Korean statelessness, Korean immigrants, Dainichi in Japan, and Korean immigrants in Sakhalin Island in Russia, embodies this sort of resonance with iodine in its sort of scriptural narration, story-like telling of how iodine also go through a simulation or has a selection process of what is pure, what is not. So the actors themselves are discovering that process in the story. So flowing with iodine was an opening for me to see what else does pain and suffering flow with. The marks on the land tend to reflect connectedness. So with the ghost's presence, judgment, when you can't hear exactly what is said, sits on a suspension of invented absence. The capturing technology, the camera, the voice, recorded and projected, the image, the movement, all played a part in creating this ghost. The ghost prevents the exploration of darkness turning into another oppressive structure, of judgment and knowledge, of cultural warfare, of power to an individual. These pictures are here to remind me to breathe and have a sip of water. So that I don't just keep reading and get really boring. The ghost is also an invented protection. While being relatively alone in sense-making process, which for me, that was the process of this inquiry that I sort of described just now, a lot of it was motivated by seeking alternatives outside of nation-state belonging, due to the belonging becomes uninhabitable. So this brings the necessity to address the idea of loss, the alternative to the shadow is not new. Just like new forms of energy resources that have always been there, but now are being claimed as new energy because they weren't the priorities, they are not new, but they're new now. But instead, the shadow, the alternative to shadow, at the same time, it is something that incorporates time. As time has never been linear, so nothing was truly lost. So instead of saying time is non-linear, I think one could try to imagine time as a mountain. And if time is a mountain, then it requires a different kind of sensing. So I would like to give you a bit more of a personal introduction of where I come from. I was born into a family, a waterway system connecting classic Chengdu Chill, Sichuan lore, a gentle dose of artistic lineage and ambition, an abundance of struggle in gender expression and sexuality, a well-versed forgetfulness that is necessary for zone in everyday life. Desires, conscious and unconscious, were marked by histories of migration, unverifiable stories of orphanhood and criminalization, with memories marked by the changing connection of land and kings. I was also born into a life lived with sacred mountains, of temperate marine climate inland, reading heights of mists in the air at various times of the day as a form of dialogue from the city basin to the mountains that were sheltering us from the Siberian cold with the Tibetan plateau. I grew up in the waterways of those mountains. My fondest memories as a child from a nuclear family out of playing and being together with the life cycles of salamanders, ferns, leaves, trees, frogs, and birds. But it was also a limited experience. At one time, to one facade of the mountain, one stream, there's impossibility in seeing a bigger picture, a collective sensing that is intersubjective. And in order to not objectify a mountain, to honor what one knows in togetherness, and to stand by time's non-linear nature, I feel the need to participate in collective sensing. The consciousness of a nation is similar. It depends on intersubjectivity. To know where it's at in its current state, we should be able to speak about it, how China exists for each of us, and together as a people, if the nation should stand. The tension lies in, I'm a person from a people exiled from means of protection, as citizens and self-determined agents. The stream I am in of the mountain is one of rare privilege means to pursue an alternative path to be away, to be a citizen without political agency and yet not a political refugee. The tension I hold between my truth, hopes, and ideas and the potential for a collective sensed reality is a weighted mass. Meanings yet to be made sense of, ways of gatherings waiting to be invented, a constant work in progress. The extremity of my connection to the nation state and the impossibility, the lack it presents, drives the search for the unhurt. So it is from here I look for a place where there's a sense of shelter, a belonging that is anti-fragile, that is inherently shared by all of us. So when life drove almost all forms of connectedness that weren't protected to a dead end on the collective level and on a personal level, I decided to follow and realize what mountains, steps, and waterways that I was born into whispered, which is that I am not alone. Those whispers have in turn become something that gathers around the commitment of collectiveness via our custodial relations. My commitment to those who whispered protection. At the same time, I began a long journey of shedding habits of extractive practices as an artist and as a person, which coincided with multiple forms of return to generational markings on land and people, to knowing them, to relationship with languages, with technologies in the making of art and in our everyday life, with materials, with our bodies, and with our kings. So to do that, I set out to understand my own custodians. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is a piece of text that was written from about 4 fault lines in relationship to 4 my kings and I won't go into it, but a little bit of a summary that I wrote in comparison to these volcanoes of glacier and factory from number one, my grandfather, the anthropocentric naming of geological fault and the reinstated newness of geothermal energies, my grandmother. The failure of man-made infrastructure and concealed death in an earthquake, my father. The objectified beauty of a lake that registered long history of migration and also harbors data includes climate change in that region, my mother. So the writing is an observation of what might be connecting them to these places that has been significant to knowing these individuals in the history of migration. I wrote about habits of emotion from my teens, their habits of emotion, their relations to objects, to themselves, to knowingness. For my grandmother, for example, she likes to cover furniture with these long sort of fabric. And my grandfather was a very narcissistic man who likes to brush his hair and look into the mirror every 10 minutes in the very short amount of time that I got to see him. My father is someone who has a strong knowingness installed in him of his mission and destiny. And my mom is pure, at the same time gullible. So this piece of writing wrote with many different languages and done by many people. My early interest in language includes the untranslatability of language, its relation with consciousness, engagement with senses, and releasing of control with working with languages that I had no access to. It is also a place of connectivity, thoughts and meaning, driving forms and actions. The language too is symbiotic, utterance, sounds, and constraints in forms, connections and being disconnected. It's an inherent wisdom from Chinese characters because it describes energy in pictures, but it's out of practice of being related to a place of agency. So it's not alive in place as a language in Chinese that has that wisdom. It's not alive because it's not practiced in place. So there's seated in me from long ago an idea to restore that practice, which was one of the main reasons amongst the making of the Earth Turned Green. So in describing this work, I wrote about a day in each season in Minnesota Makoche, known as Minnesota in the US. Seasons, in terms of a day in each season, but season as widely understood are limited to 4, which is not the number of seasons in a lot of cultures. So I collaborated with theater lighting expert to translate these sentences into theater lighting, so to sort of mimic how those sentences flow with lights and colors. And then I translated these images again to text, and then translated by my Tibetan teacher, Genski La, to Tibetan. And we learn the languages through asking questions and reading, repeating after. So to give an example, this is a postcard I made for the Media City by New in Seoul. So you could see the on the left side, top left corner, there's Tonak, which is the head river. And Nak here means darkness. In general, it means darkness, like the color. And then it flows through the city Nakchu. But Nakchu is nourished by Tonak, which is the head water of the river. And it goes to a county called Nakshu. Shu means village, and Nak, again. Here, if you put the consonant sa, which is at the bottom, which maybe you can't see, but after nak, it means forest. Shinak is forest. So the language in terms of what it's saying, in terms of how it transforms, is always alive. It's not separable. The reality and the language is not separable. The darkness, the water, the forest, they all share two similar consonant particles. So that is one example of some of the things we discussed. So language being an access to how knowledge and stories emerged. And this process became an offering alongside with Genskila's own field. She is a ecologist studying Tibetan Patu. And we speak about many things in our classes, often get sidetracked, and for example, we spoke about how many words are there for bear. Why? Because they're used, the words are used to evoke fear, because bear and human don't go together when they meet each other. There's fear, bear has fear, and we have fear. Therefore, the words are there to separate us. And what happened now is that because of the building of highway inside of the mountain, their food chains are disturbed, and the bears are in Nakchi, the city in the middle. They are invading kitchens, they're stealing food, and there's death on both sides. So we speak about the fear that had to be installed through language in us with our relationship with bear, and what happens now, and what other countries are doing about it, like Spain and other countries who use mitigation methods, and what we can learn about it. So these are some of the discussions that we have in our class, which is life-changing for me. We talk about medicinal flower, the melting glacier, and the moss that is a climate indicator. I'm not sure some of you heard of it, Takakia, our oldest plant ancestor, which is in danger right now. So in speaking about these, we recognize that we are offered a political agency under protection of knowing what to work for. And it's a very strange occurrence, but at the same time, very moving and blessed for me to feel that. And it gives way to what I would like to do in the future as a person, not just as an artist. And it sort of illuminates to me how we can wield power collectively. Where and who we can learn from becomes quite clear. Limits that feels more real too. So whatever the subject that you're dealing with, when you hit the limit where your interference is being subjected to the dominant power structure, there is a field of interaction that can happen when you are shrouded in a way that you know you're shrouded by the goal that you're working for. And art in turn here, for me, onwards, becomes integrated to what life is. The separation of art and life, which is probably an old idea, but actually not at all, because I think we're all sort of, not we're all, but like our practitioners in the field are a victim of this alienation. Is a result of the extractive pattern, but here it sees a healing for me. And I can speak more about it later. And the last two works that I would like to speak about are relatively new works for me. So I will read from the description that I wrote, relatively fresh and recent. So Grants of Coherence as a series is a wish for continuity in aligning what becomes known and what is practiced, amending and coming together of an understanding for art and life. Its first short film, But This is the Language We Met In, is where trees, teeth, and spoken words cross beyond the threshold of re-relating. Many elements in the film are of a learning process, of a word's relation to language, a language expression to another, of wood and room returning to tree and soil, of teeth evoking bone memories, its 400 million year evolution from fish scales, of working together and of a new story revealing itself. Instead of coming to terms with or tracing the complexity of a loss, the series proposed a different position in relation to the pain of losing. The complexity of a loss in the forbidden speech, in specific geographies, prompted aspect of the work in finding ways to remember, so that what is spoken does not linger on the surface. The surface here can be experienced as an entropy of energy which reveals how forgetfulness is learned and asserted, alike the protests in 2022 with Chinese people gathered in name of the Uyghur people, whose residential building caught fire under lockdown policy. When answering the call for solidarity and empathy, one can very well be simultaneously embedded in the conditioning of wrong relations. Facing the limitation of understanding the pain of detachable others on alienated land, the work advocates for an in-place knowledge in one's own body, in one's home, drawing up the first term of remembering, that is connectedness. So rather than knowing not lost, one knows what is known as lost. It is also a knowingness of connection, to know wood and sand in a room as tree and water, to know one's place has always been a part of. So in a time where Uyghur people, language, and culture faces a gross unjust, one can seed in the direction of a possibility for protection and patiently wait for the seed to come to know its soil, which is the wish I have for myself too. In a time, if one is without inviolable teachings, foundations, and unhurt belongings, everything can be ruined, including words, languages, stories, technologies. When collectivity is criminalized politically, or when the alternative sits outside the current workings of dominating systems, my struggles and motivations have been and continue to be the exploration of being together in place, while being aware of the visage of power wielded by individuals in the name of the collective. So I learned in this work how to ask for permission, what I am able to be part of. I asked for solidarity in stories, where cultural knowledge can be given a chance to be experienced in good relations. Wild horses and their ecosystem as migratory species becomes the indicator of non-linear time. So I don't know if some of you know of the story Wooden Horse, but it has many variations and is told across geographies from Norway to the Uyghur region. It's a story that is multifaceted, tells of migration and technology. In this retelling of solar whales, it is situated via the specificity of language, sound, materiality, and environment into its Uyghur context, bringing forth potential protagonists across kinship narrative, as in the story is not written with the people being the protagonists, like what happened and what they said, but the room being the protagonist, the material that is used to build the room is the protagonist, the wind and the sky sort of witness things happening. So through bearing witness of governance reflected in the Wild Horse Preserve created by the Kaniguntin First Nation in BC, China's recent wild horse repatriation policies and their respective utilization and advancement in solar energy. So one for the First Nation is self-determined energy value reassignment. And for China, it's a top-down policy of what solar energy consists of and can be developed and distributed. The story, with the permission of communities involved, is encoded into relatedness of the land on traditional Chilcotin territory. So as the Wooden Horse, I'm not going to read this part, and I will try to explain it. So the work was made with this guideline. So it first started as a workshop with the children at the school called Nightingale, and they were giving this exercise where you imagine a number of horses in front of your camera, and when you feel like it's the right number of horses, you stop and you film with an analog camera. It's a Super 8 camera. With that camera, imagining with the absence of the horse in front of the land. So you moved with your imagination, but it's like a dance with the ghost. The horses are not in the film. They are all very knowledgeable because they all have horses in their families. And then this proposal extended to anyone who holds the camera, and that's how the film is made. It is also guided by a sonic map, the film through stories registering multitude of presence, so the imagination of the horse, the sound of the horse, and many other creatures and people. It becomes, for me, a hope for the film to become a ritualistic device for the reclaiming of its own capture mechanism, so nothing exists for the camera. Nothing is for the camera to be captured, but the film is an object, a story. It's an object for the story in the process of remembrance for the language involved, Uyghur and its translation, as well as Chilcotin spoken by the children. The work is made on traditional Chilcotin territory with the support of Haudenosaunee First Nation government and communities. It is also supported by Jerome Foundation in Minnesota, Makoche.
Thank you so much, Shen Xin. That was really incredible to see all those works together.